Good morning. My name is Scotland Vesti and I am 7 years old. I live in the Hollen, North Carolina area and I just completed 3.5 years of treatment for acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Going through chemo wasn't always easy. I lost my hair 3 months into treatment and often felt tired, itchy, and weak. And I also missed out on a lot of other things that other kids got to do, like at a school, birthday parties, and other family get-togethers. But I know that I'm one of the lucky ones because I've lost a lot of other friends along the way to childhood cancer. But I am very thankful to be here with you today in Washington, D.C. My first visit to Washington, D.C. was in June, when my mom and I joined the Alliance for Childhood Cancer in asking Congress to increase NIH funding and to introduce the STAR Act. I was so happy that they actually listened to me. They voted to increase NIH funding, and many members of Congress signed up to support the STAR Act. I couldn't believe that we made a difference. The news has spread that it's time to make childhood cancer research a national priority because the kids deserve more childhood cancer research. How awesome is it that our army of supporters is growing? Well, it's been 3 months since the last time I was here, and when I heard about your meeting today, I decided it was time for me to come back. Why? Because my job isn't finished yet. There's still many kids with cancer who don't have a cure, and that's why we're here today. With that, I'd like to thank Congressman McCaul and Van Hollen for leading a congressional caucus that raises awareness for pediatric cancer. Welcome all of you to your 6th Annual Childhood Cancer Summit. And together, I think we can make our voices heard on the Hill. Thank you.
Wow. That's a very tough act to follow. Let me give another round of applause for Scott, our survivor, and his mother, Nancy. This is why we're here. People like Scott, all of you in the room have been through experiences like this, whether you're a parent who lost their child or you have a child who survived with survivorship issues. We've come a long ways, but we have a long ways to go. Cancer is still the #1 killer of our children, and it is our goal to eradicate and destroy this disease once and for all. You know, I chair the Homeland Security Committee, and I try to protect the American people from the threats that I see. But this is the #1 threat, really, to our children. And I can't think of a more worthy, greater cause than this one. And I want to thank all of you for being here today to be a part of this mission, this cause that we have. And we have made great success, and I do want to thank a few individuals in addition to Scott, who survived leukemia. One reason I got involved in the fight is I had a lot of parents who came to me who lost their children. I also lost my best friend in grade school to leukemia. Back then it was a death sentence. Today, it's not, and that's the good news. But we have a lot more work to do. I also want to recognize Andy Taylor, who has been really the brainchild genius. He's becoming quite the celebrity in the childhood cancer circles, and I want to thank my wife, Linda, for all of her great work on this effort. I actually introduced her as my daughter at the last event, but we have 5 teenagers, and I thank you for raising them. We call them domestic terrorists at times. And I also want to thank Nancy Goodman, who was also the genius behind the Creating Hope Act. I'm just a messenger. I'm an advocate. I formed the caucus because these children don't have lobbyists here in Washington. They don't have advocates. And so, unfortunately, they're not made the priority oftentimes in Congress that they should be. And that's what the caucus is designed to change. The caucus has resulted in, I think, some good legislation. And just let me say a few things about the Creating Hope Act. You know, when Nancy and I were working on this, and Andy and Linda and Brianna's out there, our great childhood cancer survivor advocate who I took on the House floor in violation of the House rules to lobby that bill, but we got it done, and you know what? It was experimental. We didn't know if it was going to work. And guess what? It did. And now, since the 1980s, we only had one childhood cancer drug since the 1980s. And thanks to the Creating Hope Act, we now have a drug to cure neuroblastoma. And little Rex Ryan, Dell Children's, you're going to hear from them later today. But, United Therapeutics really discovered the drug, had a clinical trial in my hometown of Austin at Dell Children's Hospital. And Casey and Leslie Ryan have a little son named Rex who's a survivor now because of this new drug. And I got to meet Rex at Dell Children's, a little 3-year-old kid, full of energy, blonde hair, running around. I wish he could be here today, but his parents are here. I can't think of anything more gratifying. We do a lot of stuff up here that doesn't amount to anything. But to be able to do something like that, where you can see a direct result that actually saved a child's life, I can't think of anything more important than that. And Rex gave me a drawing of the Capitol, and it sits behind my desk here in Washington. And I think a lot about Rex, and I think about all the children who have both died and survived, and the children of the future whose lives we're going to save by continuing this great cause. And so we convene here as advocates and talk about what can we do. It's cathartic, and we come together to eradicate this disease. But I can tell you the most important 2 things on your agenda. One is to reauthorize the Creating Hope Act. We did that. We passed the Cures Act in the House, which increased funding for the National Institute of Health at a time when it's hard to do that. But we did that. We increased NIH funding, and we also reauthorized the Creating Hope Act. The Senate needs to act. If the Senate does not act by St. Patrick's Day, the Creating Hope Act will expire. And that's unconscionable. Legislation that has been proven to save kids' lives, with over 4 drugs that have come out, each of these vouchers worth $350 million that can go to further research and development. It's unconscionable that the Congress not act on this. The House has done its job, and now it's time for the Senate. We've also introduced the STAR Act, which essentially stands for survivorship, treatment, access, and research. And it does many, many things. And there's a lot of handout material on this. But we put together a package that we thought would relate to those 4 issues that we think is realistic, that can be achievable, that can be passed by the Congress. So when you go to members' offices, tell them about the STAR Act. Tell them about the bipartisan support for it, that Jackie Spear is joining me in the good fight. And also tell them about reauthorizing the Creating Hope Act in the Senate. My state, we're always a little bit proud in Texas, but we have something called CPRIT. It's a Cancer Research Institute. And, 3% of that budget was directed towards childhood cancer. But just recently, they changed that priority from 3 to 31%. At the National Cancer Institute, and we're going to hear from NCI later, 4% is allocated to childhood cancer. 4% to our children who have a far greater lifespan ahead of them. That's unconscionable. I think we could take a little lesson from my state. Let's increase that number from 4 to 30%. I just really want to, Scott, thank you. Little hero. There are so many little heroes out there. When you go to these hospitals, and I do it very frequently, fortunately many are surviving now, but some don't. And it's probably one of the most heart-wrenching experiences you can see is a child that's dying, losing their hair, dealing with needles every day. It's one of the saddest experiences you can see. And we need to stop it. We need to stop the horrific experience that everybody in this room has been through. And again, I want to thank all of you for your heroism, for standing up for this cause. We're going to continue the fight, and we're going to eventually defeat this terrible disease. Thank you very much. Now let me introduce my colleague. What was that? That was very. That was odd. Let me introduce my colleague Jackie Spears.
Good morning, everyone. I've got a lot of competition here now, Mike. Thank you. Oh, good. Okay. Thank you, Mike. And Scott, not only are you an incredible hero for this effort, not only are you a man of courage, but you're a rock star when it comes to being a speaker. And in about 20 years, we want you to come back here, not as an advocate for childhood cancer research, but as a member of Congress. Will you think about that? I'm honored to be here with all of you this morning. Mike has done an outstanding job of setting the stage here. I'm going to talk a little bit outside of this stage. This institution is incredibly dysfunctional right now. The fact that you have Mike McCaul and Chris Van Hollen and myself coming together on this issue says that we don't have to be dysfunctional. The public now is deeply troubled by the inability to get things done here in Congress. So as you move through the halls of this edifice today and speak to members of Congress, I want you to talk about the fact that they can do something for the American people by supporting the STAR Act, by increasing funding for childhood cancer in NIH. And do that with a sense of indignation that we haven't done it already, and recognize that each and every one of you has extraordinary power, and you should use it. We, as members of Congress carrying this legislation, are truly just vessels. It would have no oomph if it wasn't for you. I had experience many years ago that is somewhat akin to what you are going through. I know that Andrea Church is here among you. She's from California, from my district. Her daughter, Riley, was 14 years old and had inoperable brain tumors. And she got great care, except she was given a therapy that was being used on adults that was not consistent with the kind of care that should be given to a child. And she was given therapy that was for recurrent tumors, and hers was a primary tumor. The fact that we would engage in therapies on children that are not appropriate for them is, to use Mike's word, unconscionable. 21 years ago, my husband was killed in an automobile accident. I was pregnant with our second child. He was run over by a young man who had no brakes, ran a red light, and had no insurance. In my personal grief at the time, there was one thing I wanted to do. I didn't want anyone else to have to go through what I went through. I had the resources to pay for the funeral, but lots of other people would not. And so I made it my goal to introduce legislation in California that would require proof of auto insurance at time of registration. It took a full year to get it through, but it did get through and became law. And then the following year, we passed legislation that created a low-cost auto insurance plan for people who were low income. Out of your grief, you can create a law that will impact thousands of children, not just this year, but every year. And so use that extraordinary power that you have and shame us a little bit into doing the right thing. Shame us into being functional. Shame us into creating a law that is going to transform the lives of Scott and so many others. Because we owe it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. I think that's a great call to action, and shame on Congress, really. I mean, but as I've said, we've done our job in the House, fortunately, on both NIH and the Creating Hope Act, and it's time for the Senate to act, and of course the White House has been a great partner on this one and is ready to sign it as soon as we can get it out of the Senate. Our next speaker is Dr. Helman. He is the acting director of the National Cancer Institute. I didn't mean to put you in the hot seat, sir, with my comments. NCI for Cancer Research. It's home to NCI's Pediatric Oncology branch, where he also serves as head of the Molecular Oncology section. He sits on the Scientific Advisory Committee for Stand Up to Cancer, and has been the past chairperson, current member of the American Association for Cancer Research, Pediatric Cancer Working Group. He also serves on the board of directors of the Children's Inn at NIH as a clinical advisor, which if you haven't been to the Children's Inn, I'd recommend that you visit. It's a great, great place for kids. So with that, Dr. Helman.
Well, good morning, everyone. I have a tough act to follow, and I think Scott told us all why we're here today. So I will try. I have 25 minutes. I will try to leave some time for questions and discussion. And I want to thank Congressman McCaul and Van Hollen and all Spears for all of the work that you do, and all of you in the audience. I have a lot of colleagues, friends. And so we're very excited to participate in this event. So just to remind you, the NCI's mission is to help people live longer, healthier lives by supporting research to reduce the incidence of cancer and to improve the outlook for patients who develop cancer. And we believe we're making progress, but now is not the time to take our foot off the accelerator. Well, I hate when this happens. This clicker does not seem, okay, whoops, go back. A delay. Can you go back to the third slide, please? Yeah. So the National Cancer Institute presented their budget proposal and priorities for fiscal year 2017. And we are asking for an additional $355 million to both study basic science, listed on the top here. I think there's a pointer. Doesn't work, that's okay. And you can see we've asked for $150 million in the general category of understanding cancer. This goes into basic science studies on the biology of the immune system, the biology of cancer, and genomic analysis of tumors. And we've asked for another $205 million to bring that research to patients as soon as possible. And I would like to add here that you'll see the first category, precision medicine clinical trials. That includes funding for the pediatric match study, which we are very excited and hopeful we can get open in 2016. Maybe I'll just ask you all to advance this because there seems, okay. So one of the points I would like to make very briefly is that we still believe we have more basic science that we have to accomplish. We have to study the basic biology because we are not so smart to know what's going to lead to an advance 10, 12, even 15 years in the future. And we believe that continual funding of basic science is critical to advancing outcomes of children with cancer, both for detection, treatment, as well as our greatest hope, which would be to prevent cancer in children. Next slide, please. And this, I think, slide shows that we've made some progress. You can see that while the delay-adjusted incidence of childhood cancer has gone up slightly in the last 20 years, mortality has clearly gone down. So while we have a larger population, we have more children with cancer, the mortality has gone down. Next slide. And I believe a lot. I believe it's 10-year mortality, but I'm not exactly sure, Nancy. But I believe that basic research, and you're going to hear some of this, and I'll mention a few things, has really given us hope, I would say unprecedented hope, that we're going to change the outcome of children with cancer. And this has directly led to the development of immunotoxins, and there's a toxin called pasudotox that was actually developed in the intramural NCI program, and it is currently being studied in pediatric, in the children's oncology group, in ALL prior to transplant in randomized studies. So this came out of a research area of Dr. Paston at the NCI. We better understand the immune system, and we've been able to manipulate T cells, which are a major arm that recognizes and kills tumors. And when I started as a fellow in 1983, using the immune system to kill cancer was a fantasy and a dream. Well, I will not go into this. I'll show you one slide, but chimeric antigen receptors are having its greatest impact on childhood ALL. And we have patients that are alive today because they received CD19 chimeric antigen receptor T cells. You've all heard about these new drugs, these immune checkpoint inhibitors that are having fantastic success in lung cancer, in melanoma, in bladder cancer. We're just testing it now in pediatric cancer. There's a large study going on in the Children's Oncology Group. We're actually doing a smaller study in various tumors. We're very certain that we will figure out how to implement these kinds of treatments into pediatric cancer as well. You will hear about dinutuximab, which we'll hear from Dr. Jeffs. So and Congressman McCaul mentioned it for neuroblastoma. A great success story. We're looking for its activity in other pediatric cancers. And crizotinib, which was actually developed not to inhibit ALK, but to inhibit another signaling pathway. When ALK fusions were found in lung cancer, in about 5% of lung cancer, it's had a major impact. We now believe, and we have evidence, that it will also have an impact in patients with altered ALK in neuroblastoma. So these are all fruits, sometimes 10 years prior to studying basic science that is now starting to bear fruit in treatment of childhood cancer. Next slide, please. So you're going to hear a lot. I'm sure you've read in the newspapers. What are these CAR T cells? Some of this was developed as we studied fundamental molecular biology. We can take a T cell and manipulate it so that it recognizes, with an antibody-like moiety, recognizes something on the surface of a cancer cell, but then activates the T cell killer activity and kills tumor cells. And so that's what a CAR T cell is, and we have seen phenomenal results in CD19 positive childhood ALL. Next slide. These immune checkpoints, again, 20 years of basic science into how the immune system works. The immune system works because it turns itself off after it does its job so that we all don't develop autoimmune disease. What we've learned is that we've learned the signals, and if we turn off those signals when we want an immune response to a cancer, we've seen remarkable results, and these are now actively being studied in pediatric cancer. Next slide, please. I want to just mention, many of you, certainly the advocates, know about the NCI's Pediatric Preclinical Testing Consortium. This was just recompeted, so it's fully funded through the NCI. And the idea is to do a better job at testing drugs quickly so that we get more drugs that have activity as soon as we bring them into the clinic. Next slide. And you can see we have a coordinating center, and then there are centers that oversee therapeutic development in basically all the major pediatric tumors, including brain tumors, leukemia, solid tumors such as neuroblastoma, sarcoma, and osteosarcoma. Next slide, please. So I borrowed this slide from a close friend and colleague, John Maris. So I would say we're at the beginning of a modern medical success story, but I always mess up Churchill's quote, but maybe we're at the end of the beginning, but we're certainly nowhere near the end, and that's why we need to keep our foot on the accelerator. But I've plotted here the survival for leukemia, lymphoma, and Wilms tumor in blue from the 1960s and in red from the 1990s. So this is already data that's 15 years old. And you can see we've taken several of these tumors that were a death sentence if you were diagnosed in 1965, and we now expect 80% survival in patients with these diagnoses. And on the right is just a slide of several children having neuroblastoma that was a death sentence, and now, thanks to some of the development that you'll hear from United Therapeutics, we're beginning to cure more and more of these children. Next slide. But there's still a major problem, and this is part of what we struggle with the need to make sure we keep pressure on for continuing research in this arena. So on the yellow line shows continuing decreases in mortality rate in lymphoma and leukemia, one of our great successes. But the blue line looks at all other pediatric cancers. And I think it's pretty clear to see that line that was going down is now flattened. So we are really struggling in these more recalcitrant tumors in pediatrics to continue to make success. Next slide, to have success. The other issue, and Congressman McCaul touched on it in his terrific opening remarks, is survivorship. And even in those patients that have 80%, 90% cure rates, as we've cured more and more patients, we understand that these patients have a tremendous price to pay. And these are the long-term toxicities of our very toxic drugs that we use today. And they cause problems with the heart, problems with fertility, problems with second malignant neoplasms, problems with, it almost looks like we're accelerating the aging process. Next slide. So this is from the Childhood Cancer Survivorship Study, another NCI-funded long-term program. And what I'm showing you here is three different, the blue graph is recurrence of disease. And you can see when you're diagnosed with a pediatric tumor, your greatest chance of dying is from a recurrent tumor. But as these children get out, and so we're looking over a 20-year time span, at some point, 20, 25 years later, you become higher risk of dying from a non-recurrence, that is from a second malignant tumor, from cardiac disease, and other toxicities. And so realize now, when we treat a 5, 6-year-old with ALL, we're talking when they're 28, 30 years old. We need to change those curves. Next slide. The other thing is, even for those, when the more we look at the toxicity, the more we understand that if you look out 20 years from patients who survive a childhood cancer, they'll all, if you look carefully, there's some side effects that they have to live with every single day. And so you can see more than half the patients report some side effect that we don't expect a patient their age to have. So we have to do better, even for our patients that we cure. Next slide. So what's the problem we're trying to solve? Well, for most of the 70-year history of developing cancer treatment, it's relied on drugs that basically kill dividing cells. So they're marginally more toxic to tumor cells because they grow quickly, but they have a lot of toxicity to normal tissue. And what we're looking for is molecular markers with the explosion of our ability to genetically characterize tumors that would predict benefit and help us understand resistance, that is, patients who respond and then the tumor recurs, so that we can better treat each patient. And the proposed solution is to use genomics to identify and target molecular vulnerabilities of individual cancers. And when I say genomics, I include immunotherapy, because I showed you we use genetic manipulation to arm T cells that we couldn't do before we understood how the genomics works and how to manipulate at the genetic level certain cells. Next slide. So we need better biomarkers. We need to understand the real drivers of each individual patient's tumor, and we need therapeutic targets that will intercept those drivers. Next slide. So when I say, okay, that's fine, you can. When I say biomarker, what I mean is it's a characteristic that is objectively measured, quantitated, and evaluated as an indicator of diagnosis, prognosis, or normal biologic process, or pathogenic process, or even a marker that tells us if a drug we're using is working quickly, so that if it isn't, we can change it quicker. When you hear about driver mutations, what we mean there is genomic alterations that are causally implicated in what caused that cancer, and that if we can block it, should make the cancer go away. And a therapeutic target is a molecular entity that's differentially attacking a tumor as opposed to a normal cell. Next slide. So this is what we want. We want biomarkers of pediatric tumors, we want driver mutations, and we want driver mutations that are therapeutically actionable. Next slide. So how do we do this? How do we get this done? Well, there are challenges. This is not going to be an easy road to move down. Next slide. And here are some of the challenges. Here's a list of driver mutations that we've already identified in a variety of pediatric cancers listed on the right. And this is a slightly older slide, so I'm happy to say IDH1 and IDH2, which is the fourth from the bottom. These are drivers in pediatric brain tumors, and they weren't actionable. We now have a drug that blocks IDH1 and IDH2. But there's a lot of other drivers that we don't quite have drugs yet. We're working on them, and we're hopeful, but this is why we have to keep our foot on the accelerator. Next slide. The other problem we face unique to pediatric cancer is that we look for mutations, that is, alterations in the genetic code of a tumor compared to normal tissue. And we've known now for several years that the mutations in pediatric cancers are much more rare than they are in adult tumors. And this slide just shows the rate of mutations per number of bases in the genome. And you can see that melanomas, lung cancers have the highest mutation rates, and neuroblastoma, all the way at the left, has the lowest mutation rate. And that means it's going to be the hardest to find mutations that we can have actionable drugs for, but we need to look, and we need to look a lot harder than we have so far. Next slide. So, the challenges for individualized therapy is low mutation rates. Many of the variants we found we don't have drugs for, and a lot of the mutations we find are in areas that it's going to be difficult. And the other thing we know is that when we treat a patient, new mutations arise. So we're going to have to learn how to stay one step ahead. Next slide. We can skip that. Go to the next slide, please. So we are very excited. The NCI has just started what they call the molecular analysis for therapeutic choice. And the concept is pretty simple. If you look on the right panel, you have a variety of patients with the exact same tumor. Let's say it's neuroblastoma. So 2 patients have a mutation indicated by the purple, and they should get a drug that blocks the purple. You have 1 patient that has a mutation indicated in blue, and they should get a drug that blocks the blue, and so on and so forth. So that's what we're looking for. Next slide. Whoops, go back one. Sorry, so this has started about a month ago now, and we have literally 30-some drugs that all the pharmaceutical companies have agreed to allow us to apply in patients where we find a mutation that we know a particular drug would intercept that signaling. And we are working hard with a children's oncology group, and we hope to launch a very similar study in pediatric patients in the next year. Next slide. One other thing I wanted to mention, because I think it's pretty exciting, is a recent SPORE, which is a special program of research excellence that the NCI funded to look at what's called hyperactive RAS. So RAS is one of these mutations that we don't have a drug for, but it's known to be active in neurofibromatosis that can lead to a tumor called malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumors. And rather than studying a disease site, breast cancer, lung cancer, kidney cancer, we funded a program that has several pediatric oncologists, Dr. Wiedemann, Dr. Shannon, Dr. Clapp, that are studying RAS mutations and trying to develop new treatments. Doesn't matter what the disease is, but in fact, we're looking for things that have common genetic alterations. Next slide. So this is my last slide. This is our hope. This is our dream. The future of pediatric trials is we will take a relapsed or refractory solid tumor. We will identify a mutation. We will have could be FGFR4, ALK, KIT. We will have a drug, and we will match those patients to a specific drug. This is going to take a while. We're going to learn a lot when we do this, but we're confident that if we continue to push to make progress, we'll get there. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to take any questions. Please. Well, I would say, first of all, I'm a pediatric oncologist. I prioritize every child that has a cancer. But I understand we have certain tumors that I tried to show that we're doing not nearly enough. A case in point is DIPG. These are essentially a death sentence when you're given that diagnosis. And we are doing everything we can to figure out how do we get over this hump. And I'm confident that by one of the problems in DIPG has been it's very hard even to get samples to look at the genetic alterations. We're beginning to make progress there. So to me, the answer is we just got to keep pushing. And we need people like you to say, this is not acceptable. It's not acceptable. But I think we still need some better understanding to make progress. But we just need to keep saying, this isn't acceptable. Well, I hope that's the case. Yeah, so Congressman McCaul, as I said, I would love it to be 100%, frankly. It's what I do, so I have a vested interest. On the other hand, that number is a little bit tricky because as I tried to point out, people that were just studying the basic immune system, nothing to do with pediatric cancer, just trying to understand how does the immune system work. Years ago, and Jim Allison is one of the people that spent years doing this. That led to checkpoint inhibitors, and it also led to CAR T cells. That has had its major impact on a pediatric cancer ALL. So I don't know what the right number is, and I would like to see more funding for pediatric cancer, but I think the best way to make that happen is to make sure we get more funding for basic research and for clinical research. But we need more money, there's no doubt about that. So I'll let you guys figure out how to deal with that. It's really something that I have, I'm too caught up in, so I have to be careful that I don't have a conflict of interest.
Well, as it turns out, assuming it passes, it provides billions of dollars.
It would definitely make a difference. Okay, thank you very much.
I was told Gavin Lindbergh is going to introduce the next panel. Oh, he is, okay. So it looks like Congressman Van Hollen. Yeah, just while we're waiting for Congressman Van Hollen, and thank you for that presentation. And I can't emphasize enough the passage of the Cures Act in the Senate as you talk to members' offices, particularly in the Senate. Lamar Alexander is the chairman of the relevant committee. We really, I think, did our job in the House increasing funding for NIH by billions of more dollars that can go towards childhood cancer research. And within that, Cures Act is the, as I mentioned before, the Creating Hope Act reauthorization, along with something called compassionate use, which I've been very involved in as well. We talked about it last summit, about the providing more access to people who have life-threatening diseases, greater access to life-saving medications. Had a constituent of mine, Andrea Sloan, who died from a disease that she may have had been cured had she had access to a clinical trial. So without further ado, I see Congressman Van Hollen is here, and my co-chair, and I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you for your incredible leadership. It's been a privilege to partner with you with the Childhood Cancer Caucus. And to Dr. Helman, thank you and your colleagues at NIH and CI for your commitment to this important cause. And the fact that you're here this year and Dr. Collins was here last year, I think, is a testament to the fact that you're focused on that. And we want to make sure that you have the resources necessary to do your important work. So thank you very much to you and your colleagues. And I'm proud to represent the congressional district that is home to the National Institutes of Health and the great scientists there. So to NIH, let's give them a big round. So to everybody here in this room, it's a great coalition focused on making a difference and achieving our goal of conquering childhood cancer. So to all of you who may be fighting cancer right now, or a member of your family is fighting cancer, to those of you who have fought it and survived it and are here working to make sure that we prevent others from being hit by this disease, and that we make sure that we address the really important issues that survivors will continue to face as they go on, or whether you're the parents or the grandparents, sisters and brothers of loved ones who had cancer and lost their lives to cancer. We really thank you, because without your coming together, and those of you who have lost children to cancer, thank you for coming together to take up the cause to prevent other families from facing that pain. And that's what this is all about, trying to make sure we continue to push forward on the research and the treatment. To all of you who are part of the caretaking community, beginning with those of you who are doing medical research, to those companies that are taking that medical research and converting them into important treatments and cures, and of course to the doctors and caretakers, the nurses, and everybody else who are part of providing care and treatment. This is a big family, and we need to continue to work together to get things done. And we are proud of the progress that has been made. And we want to thank, I see Nancy Goodman here, who had an idea of how we could incentivize and expedite the process from discovery to drug to market. And the reality is the Creating Hope Act not only has created more hope, but has actually already produced very tangible results that translate that hope into real action. And you're going to be hearing from some folks on the next panel who are the evidence that that idea and the actions that people take in this room are producing results and saving lives. And so I'm not going to go into great detail. I will say I understand that the parents of Rex Ryan will be on the next panel, as will Dr. Jeffs with United Technologies, and members of the Dell Children Medical Center. And it's a coincidence, but it's an incredible coincidence, Mike, that Rex Ryan, I believe, is your constituent. United Technologies is a company located in my congressional district that we're really proud of the work they do. And so it's great to be a partner with you on the Congressional Caucus. And I do think it's quite a story that a constituent in your district in Texas, being treated by the great doctors in Texas, is now the beneficiary of a new drug created in the 8th Congressional District of Maryland, and that law became enacted because of the work of the people in this room. And what we know is that the research saves lives. Research saves lives. We've reduced significantly over the decades the toll from childhood cancer. But despite that progress, we know it remains the #1 disease taker of kids' lives. And that's why we're here, to finish the job. And we started down that path, and we just need to put our foot on the accelerator pedal and do it. That's what the Cures Act is all about. That's what the Creating Hope Act was all about. And that's what all of you are all about. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Progress around here only happens when individuals like you come together to push for positive change, and with your help, we're doing that. So thank you all very much, and next you're going to hear from Gavin Lindbergh, who's a good friend of mine and another parent who took the loss of his son, Evan, and decided to commit himself to making sure that we advance in this area to prevent that kind of loss to families in the future. So without further ado, I think it's going to be up. Gavin Lindbergh is here, and thank you very much, Gavin, for all your leadership. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Congressman Van Hollen. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gavin Lindbergh, and I have the great privilege of introducing our distinguished panel of speakers at today's summit. But before I do so, I just want to say a personal word of thanks on behalf of myself and my wife, Wendy, for our 3 terrific congressional champions that we have. We could not have better leadership here on the Hill with Congressman McCaul, Congressman Van Hollen, and Congresswoman Jackie Spears. So let's give them a big round of applause. So like so many of you, I'm here for personal reasons. I have firsthand experience of how devastating childhood cancer can be. Exactly 9 years ago today, just up the road at Children's National Medical Center, my wife Wendy and I, and Wendy is here. Wendy, please stand up. My wife Wendy and I found ourselves at Children's being told that our 3-year-old son Evan had something called stage 4 NMIC amplified neuroblastoma. And we had no idea what that was, but we quickly found out. And 4 years later, in October of 2010, we lost Evan after what can only be described as a brutal and heart-wrenching struggle that defined courage and strength. And Evan was our only child. And as we went through that journey with Evan, we quickly learned that the fight was not fair. The odds were overwhelmingly in favor of this awful thing called neuroblastoma, and not in favor of our precious son. So in his memory, we chose to try to do something about that, and we established the Evans Victory Against Neuroblastoma Foundation, or the Evan Foundation for short. And we've dedicated the rest of our lives to finding a cure for this disease, helping families and children who are currently in treatment, and raising awareness, all in our son's memory. So we are extremely proud to be with all of you today. I can't think of a more important event happening on Capitol Hill today than what's happening right here. We are very, very honored to have 6 distinguished panelists joining us for a broad-reaching discussion, and I'm going to ask all of them if they wouldn't mind to come up to the stage. So our group is going to address 2 really important issues this morning. The first is drug innovation for children with cancer, and the second is the importance of advocacy and the recently introduced STAR Act. And what I'd like to do is I will introduce all of our speakers starting at the far end of the table, and I'll go down the line, and then we will ask each of them to speak. And I think what I'll do, because I understand, Casey, you might have a travel need that would help you out if we had you go first. Is that correct? Okay, we'll do that then, and then we'll circle back to the end of the table. So it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend, Dr. Roger Jeffs, at the far end of the table. Roger is president and co-CEO and a member of the board of directors of United Therapeutics Corporation. United Therapeutics focuses on the development and commercialization of unique products for patients with chronic, life-threatening orphan diseases. The company has a very unique history It was founded by Martine and Bina Rothblatt in 1996 for very personal reasons, to develop therapeutic options and a cure for their daughter, who was diagnosed as a young child with pulmonary arterial hypertension, a rare, life-threatening form of heart failure. Building on that success, United Therapeutics, as we've heard, recently received approval of Unituxin, the first FDA-approved therapy for pediatric patients with high-risk neuroblastoma. And the company hopes to expand upon this approval and distinguish itself by seeking opportunities to develop other pediatric cancer therapies as a primary focus rather than as a secondary follow-up to study in adults. And I can tell this group personally the commitment that Roger has and the entire United Therapeutics family has to our community. I and Wendy had the great privilege of being at United Therapeutics on September 1st for a large all-employee meeting kickoff event for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. So please give a round of applause to Roger. Our next presenter is Dr. Amy Fowler. She is a pediatric hematologist-oncologist who specializes in the care and treatment of children and adolescents with cancer and blood disorders. She is currently the Clinical Research Director and Children's Oncology Group Principal Investigator for Children's Blood and Cancer Center. As a participant in the National Cancer Institute Community Oncology Research Program, she has become involved in supportive care, cancer control, and quality improvement initiatives within the COG. So please, round of applause for Dr. Fowler. Next, Casey and Leslie Ryan are from Austin, Texas, and are parents driven by a cause, and that cause is to eradicate cancer, childhood cancer specifically, from our language across the globe. Their 17-month-old son, Rex, was diagnosed with stage 4 neuroblastoma. The cancer was very advanced when it was discovered, a grapefruit-sized tumor on his adrenal gland, bone marrow involvement throughout his body, lymph node involvement, bone involvement in his spine and skull. It was a sobering day when news came for Casey, Leslie, Rex, and their 5-year-old daughter, Ellie, that after 18 months of treatment, Rex emerged with no evidence of disease. This followed 7 rounds of chemotherapy, a stem cell transplant, 12 sessions of radiation, 6 rounds of immunotherapy. They began raising awareness and funds to support childhood cancer research at both the local and national level, and their charge continues as they celebrate 1 full year of remission this October 2015. Our next presenter is Dr. Michael Link. He is a pediatric hematologist-oncologist and is the Lydia J. Lee Professor in Pediatric Oncology at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Dr. Link has served terms as a member of the Oncolytic Drugs and Advisory Committee of the Food and Drug Administration. He's a member of the Board of Scientific Advisors for the National Cancer Institute and a 10-year term as Associate Editor of the Journal of Clinical Oncology. Recently, Dr. Link completed a term as President of the American Society of Clinical Oncology, the first pediatric oncologist elected to lead ASCO. And last but not least, this is a very personal introduction. So professionally, Danielle Leach is the Director of Advocacy for the St. Paul Dirks Foundation, and she also serves as the Chair of the Alliance for Childhood Cancer, which brings more than 30 national childhood cancer organizations together to advocate for the youngest of cancer patients and survivors. But I know Danielle as Mason's mom, and I mentioned 9 years ago today we found ourselves at Children's with Evan, and not long after that we found ourselves roommates with Danielle and Mason as they were beginning their battle together. So it's amazing to me that we continue this journey together and are on this stage together today. And Wendy and I are so proud of you, what you've done in Mason's memory. So a round of applause for Danielle. So with apologies to Roger, we're going to ask Casey and Leslie to go first, and then we will circle back to Roger and come down this way. All right? Thank you.
Is that working? Okay. Hello, everyone. How are you today? Thank you for being here. I have to pull my script up so that I make sure I don't veer off course here a bit. First of all, we recognize what an honor this is to be here, and we recognize more so just that we're lucky. We're very, very lucky to be here, and it's an honor. So without further ado, I want to start with a quote from Toni Morrison. If there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. And that's what we've tried to do along our journey, is to really document every little facet of this journey, because there have been great pieces and there have been challenging ones. But I wrote a post not too long ago called The Club, and I'm just going to read that to you. I am a member of a club. It's not one that sends fancy invitations out to potential members. It's not one that has a welcome party at its induction. It's not a club I chose. It's a club that's non-discriminatory. Anyone can become a member. Individuals with hefty bank accounts, or those on welfare, those who are devout in faith, or those who believe in more earthly deities, those who have it all figured out, or those who just can't seem to find their paths, those with advanced degrees, or those whose educational paths are limited. All are welcome. No one wants to join this club, but you're not left with a choice to opt out. However, once you officially join this club, you remain in it forever. You wear the coat of arms on your breast proudly. You celebrate and grieve alongside those who wear the same crest, for you are parents of children with cancer. Unfortunately, and fortunately, you're not alone in your initiation. Every club member has his or her diagnosis story: surgical woes, transfusion speed bumps, hair loss tears, and countless sleepless nights fearing for the life of your child. Each member of the club can recount specific details of the day that changed his or her life, the day the dreams for his or her child were modified and survival became the sole mission. Side note, I wrote this right before September began, so rewind back to August 31st. Tonight, the eve of the month when our world skipped off its comfortable axis 2 years ago, I reflect on the families who begrudgingly joined this club, to which I pay costly dues each month in money, time, and heartache. It's the worst club to be assigned to, yet the greatest club to inhabit when explaining solidarity to those excluded from our club. I've seen mothers and fathers lose their babies and their teenagers. They still remain members of this club. I've seen organs, limbs, and eyes removed from children, and their parents remain faithful members paying daily membership dues. Parents who've lost the child who earned them their membership fight daily for other families who are in the club, holding tight to their children whose battles are far from over. They aren't released from the club or their duties. Their membership card is non-transferable. My child is in remission, but I am no less a card-carrying member of this club that I would have gladly avoided at all costs. I'm proud of my membership. I'm proud of my child. I'm proud of my family. We embraced this club and will gladly flash our cards to non-members to raise awareness so that our membership numbers don't increase. September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Please spread the word. In order to limit our membership, we need others' help. We dedicate our lives as permanent members of the club to ensuring others stay away from our club. We're striving for exclusivity. How will you help us with this cause? By being here today, you're doing that, and we can't thank you enough.
Rex was diagnosed 2 years ago last weekend. I guess, in a way, it was a celebration, it was a time of remembrance of where our lives and how our lives have changed. Statistically speaking, he's not supposed to be here. But thanks to the advances in medicine, Creating Hope Act, and I think especially for us, the team at Dell, he is here. Tomorrow morning, I will be absolutely exhausted, but I'll be excited because I'm taking Rex to soccer tomorrow. He's got his soccer practice and his pictures. And those are the kind of moments for the first 17 months of his life that we took for granted, we assumed would come. And then 2 years ago, today, sitting there almost a week after his diagnosis, I didn't think that was going to be possible. I remember when they came in and told us, just saying over and over, he's just a baby, he's just a baby. Being prepared and thinking I'm going to lose my baby boy. But thanks to the great team at Dell, the care they took of not only our baby boy, but of our entire family, he is still here. Thanks to the Creating Hope Act, it doesn't just create hope, it didn't just save Rex's life, it saved our family. And we're here today as a result of that. We wear our Rex Strong bracelets every day, and we have another one that a buddy of mine, he took from Chip Kelly when he was at Oregon. Apologies to you Washington Redskins fans for the Eagles reference. But win the day. We can't control what happened yesterday. It's done. Tomorrow, we can't attack until tomorrow, but we can win today. We can be the best at whatever it is we do. And for Rex, that's being a little 3-year-old boy in preschool today. Tomorrow will be a soccer player. For Leslie and I, it's to be the best parents we can be. The best assistant principal, the best elementary school principal for her. We take each day and we don't take it for granted anymore. We attack each day, and we've learned that from this little boy. But there are many other children who have lost this fight who are still in this fight. So I ask all of you, you're all here because you are invested. We need to continue to spread this word, because until this battle is done, we have to keep fighting as a group. This is not a political issue. Although it's being fought in the political arena, my 3-year-old boy is not a Republican, he is not a Democrat. He's a 3-year-old boy who, when he grows up, he wants to do 2 things. He either wants to work at P. Terry's, a burger restaurant in Austin, or he wants to be Mr. Wilmer, who is the custodian at his school. So whatever path Rex takes, that's a result of what happened here, thanks to you, Congressman McCaul and Congressman Hollen, and your work with the Creating Hope Act. The folks who created the Unituxin that helped him, the team at Dell who held our hands and held our little boy's hands. I want to thank you all for being here today and continuing to spread this word. The battle's just begun, but we're winning it, and we have to keep fighting it. And so thank you for here. I apologize, I do have to go. In Texas, we got high school football. When you're assistant principal, you got to be at the game. So go Chaps. Thank you all. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Casey. Leslie. This was a great invitation, and I appreciate being allowed to come here today and have a voice. And if nothing else, just learn that we're in this fight with you. As biopharma in general, I think we've been a silent voice, an inactive voice, and you have our commitment as a company that we're going to do more. And the poignancy of the things that you say really are impactful. So thank you for that. So if I could have my first slide, please. Next slide. So I wanted to talk today, and it's a little bit leveraging what the congressmen and women have said today about the circle of partnership and all the different groups that must align if we're going to win this battle. And the real goal is to win the battle and really kick cancer in the teeth, because you don't get a chance to do that very often. So when you do, you should take strong advantage of that. So I do agree that it is a new beginning. I think Churchill would agree with that. And I think that it's a defining time, actually, in the battle against cancer, really because of all the constituents that are here today. And I think I want to touch on the 5 key groups that need to be aligned if we're going to win against cancer and win definitively. So it's the scientific and medical community, the FDA, the legislature, pharma, biopharma, and the advocacy groups. We all need to act as one, and I'll walk through each of these different constituents a little bit now. So the next slide, please. So we talk about the scientific and medical community. So as Dr. Helman so eloquently noted, the science of cancer is exploding. and cancers that were thought impenetrable are now being beaten back. In particular, the staggering expansion of knowledge of the immune system and how it regulates and is dysregulated by various cancers is rapidly being unlocked. It seems almost daily that new advances are being made. If you could show the next slide, please. So as Congressman McCaul noted, United Therapeutics is the very, 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 very proud provider of Unituxin, the first approved therapeutic for pediatric patients with high-risk neuroblastoma, and only the third drug to receive initial FDA approval for a pediatric cancer in the last 20 years. If you show the next slide, please. So this approval was based on landmark science that was initially sponsored by the National Cancer Institute and conducted in collaboration with the network of pediatric oncologists like the one sitting next to me today in the Children's Oncology Group. And just very simply, scientifically, Unituxin binds to a specific antigen on neuroblastoma, thus allowing the immune system to recognize that it's a cancer and attack it. Unituxin was shown to improve both survival and event-free survival, or in other words, survival with less morbidity from secondary endpoints, which is also, as we heard, a critical aspect of helping these children. And I believe this approval marks one of the very few times, if not the first time, that NCI sponsored a study all the way through phase 3, and they should be congratulated for that. So how did United Therapeutics become involved? Well, we became involved when a commercial manufacturer was needed to provide commercial scale-up from the pilot manufacturing method, and UT was selected through what's called a Cooperative Research and Development Agreement, or a CRADA, via competitive bidding process. I think a critical success factor was that we didn't simply want to just be a manufacturer of Unituxin. We were already in the neuroblastoma space with our own monoclonal antibody development and our own manufacturing capability. And to NCI's credit and NIH's credit, that alone, I think, allowed us to be the bid winner. But make no mistake, it was the marshaled knowledge of NCI and the physicians in the Children's Oncology Group that made this success possible. We just took the baton and made a commercial product. Of course, the contribution and courage of the parents and your children who consented to participate in this study was absolutely paramount, so thank you for that. Next slide, please. So this one might surprise you. So the FDA. So while it may seem paradoxical that someone in the biopharma to praise FDA, I truly believe that FDA deserves significant credit. So I've been in the biopharmaceutical sector for almost 25 years, almost all of that time involved in orphan drug development, and I can resolutely say that the FDA has been appropriately forward-thinking and even flexible, which is not how they're viewed, in its application of regulatory standards to orphan diseases that address high unmet need. And it's important, though, this is not to suggest that the standards of evidence are diminished or ignored, but that expedited review and approval has been applied in a very reasoned way to accelerate the availability of therapeutics when justified. For example, Unituxin's approval was flexible and that was based on only a single trial, when typically 2 are required, that was randomized but was open label, so children were not unethically allowed to have placebo infusion of an intravenous product as a control arm. But the trial, however, had significant rigor in that 226 children and their families participated in this trial and resulted in a hard and true hallmark definitive endpoint, which proves that Unituxin will help save lives. And without that rigor, there would always be questions. So I think while the FDA takes criticism constantly, they are doing a very good job when there is high orphan unmet need, and that should be recognized, and they need to be a partner in the future success. Have the next slide, please. Let's talk about the legislature. So I'm humbled and honored for the invite today to be here in this prestigious forum at the bequest of Congressmen McCaul and Van Hollen and Spear. They and their colleagues are absolutely critical to this battle in so many ways through their sponsorship and support of legislation seminal to the continued progress in this field. It's clear and evident if you're here today that is true. As an example, the Creating Hope Act, which Nancy Goodman, one of my newest best friends, and along with the sponsorship of the congressmen here today, were instrumental in introducing, established what you've heard as the Pediatric Priority Review Voucher Award that awards the recipient an expedited review for a future drug application. So it will actually shave critical time off that review. They're only awarded if an applicant's novel therapeutic is specific and it's granted first approval for a pediatric indication, like Unituxin was for neuroblastoma. So we recently sold our voucher, and we tried desperately, actually, to set a very, very high watermark. And I hope it goes higher, but we sold the voucher for $350 million. So that is a lot of money, although we'll pay a lot of tax on that. But here's why it's important, and here's why it was important for us to set the high watermark, because individuals in this room work their tails off to get this legislation through, and it needs to be reenacted. It gives us a war chest, frankly, to expand on not only the uses of Unituxin. Unituxin will have broader applicability against other GD2 expressing cancers, but to acquire and develop other therapeutics for other rare pediatric cancers. The acquisition of a therapeutic target is very, very expensive. The development of a therapy is very, very expensive, costing hundreds of millions of dollars. But this war chest will allow us to make a forward and thoughtful effort in seeking out and destroying a pediatric cancer. And the Congressman, you should know that your intention to incentivize not only us, but other bigger biopharma to prioritize pediatric drug development is absolutely serving its purpose, so thank you for that. So, and then in the circle of partnership, and I'll just talk briefly about biopharma. So many of the key discoveries, or certainly translation of key academic or NCI discoveries, are happening in the biopharma space. Biopharma is very robust in their, particularly in the immunotherapy field, in terms of daily discovery, and I think that gets forgotten sometimes. But however, much, if not most of that effort is being centered on larger indications associated with adult cancers, and it simply, unfortunately, becomes a business case of prevalence. How big is an opportunity, and that leads to where people focus their time and attention. And that's an aspect that needs to change. I think pediatric cancers have been a secondary consideration, and that's a problem. And United Therapeutics wants to be a different voice in that fight. But as it was said, the dosing in biology for pediatric cancer is quite unique, and directed development really needs to be a mandate for all biopharma. At United Therapeutics, we're eager to do more. We look at it as virtual white space. If you're going to have a business that you're trying to grow, go where nobody else is. So this is a chance to do that. We did this in pulmonary hypertension. We've created a successful business that now allows us to be, hopefully, an important player in pediatric oncology. Here's a sort of a make you pause statistic. So it's quoted that there are more than 900 therapies in development for cancer. Less than a handful are being developed specifically for children. That's unacceptable. So yes, the markets are not large. They're not. The expense is high, but the need is overwhelming. So we're going to figure this out. We'll need your help to do that. Incentive programs certainly provide a further impetus to do more. So, but we need to do it together. I think if we can be a beacon for other companies, particularly big pharma, then that's great. And it doesn't mean we have to win as the company, as long as somebody wins and does more. So last one, please, last slide. So last but certainly not least is, and I'll close by saying that the true glue for this circle of partnership and what's going to make this a successful, cohesive platform of constituents is the advocacy and support groups, and I truly, truly mean that. So you provide constant encouragement, lobbying, cajoling. I'm looking at people that cajole me. That we all must not work in silos, but that we must work together if we want to do what this meeting is truly titled, "We Must Be a Cancer Caucus," and to do that, we need the advocacy of all of you to remind us daily we need to do more, we can work harder, and we can do better. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I've had the privilege of being one of the oncologists that helped take care of Rex and his family, and I was so excited and honored that we were asked to come with his family today to tell you his story. So really what I want to do today is to illustrate the impact of this kind of collaborative research with industry and the Children's Oncology Group can have at a local level. I want to take the laboratory research and show you how it can come home to the clinic and to our patients and their families. Next slide, please. So we're the Children's Blood and Cancer Center, which is a program of the Dell Children's Medical Center of Central Texas. We're located in Austin, Texas, and we're the only freestanding children's hospital facility in the region. There are about 46 counties or so that we draw from, and sometimes we even draw from further than that. So next slide, please. We have a booming population in Austin, more so than I think anyone has predicted. So much so that there's been a significant increase in demand for pediatric oncology services in the area. In the last 15 years, we've seen a more than triple the number of pediatric cancer cases being diagnosed, from about 30 to more than 100 in that short amount of time. Before we opened in 1988, our patients and families would have to travel to larger cities in Texas like Houston or Dallas or San Antonio to receive just standard oncology care or to participate in clinical trials. And now we're able to provide that at home in their backyards. We're a member of the Children's Oncology Group, which, as everybody knows, the large collaborative research organization. And because our membership with them, we're able to offer these kinds of groundbreaking research studies to families right there at home for them. Next slide, please. So in 2004, we opened our first biotherapy clinical trial through the Children's Oncology Group. We were one of many sites that were opening this trial, and we were very excited to be able to participate in this trial. This trial was for high-risk neuroblastoma, and as most of you know, this is one of the most common pediatric cancers that we treat and can be one of the most aggressive and difficult to treat. It requires very aggressive multimodality therapy, and families go through quite a journey during their time. And historically, patients have had a relatively poor prognosis, and the development of this chimeric antibody and unitoxin has really given a lot of hope and excitement for families that they have a more likely chance of beating this. And so since the study opened in 2004, we've enrolled 5 patients here in the Austin area, and they've all received the chimeric antibody, including Rex. Next slide, please. So this is Rex. I'm going to tell his story from a medical perspective with the family's permission. So about 6 weeks before he came to meet us, he started developing some unusual movements that lasted for a few weeks, and I think then got a little bit better. He then started to have some funny eye movements and was a little unsteady in his walking, and then came to our hospital. And there was suspicion of neuroblastoma at the time, and an MRI showed a large adrenal mass. I'm going to have the next slide, please. This is an example of his bone scan that shows this bright, giant tumor of his adrenal gland, as well as several areas in his bones that lit up. And I was allowed to use this picture with the understanding from his mother that I explained that he doesn't have a tail. That's his urinary catheter. But he had a large evaluation. He had surgery to remove the tumor. It was, the pathology was consistent with a neuroblastoma. He had evidence of metastatic disease everywhere, all over his bones, inside his bone marrow, and was diagnosed with stage 4 high-risk neuroblastoma. Next slide, please. So shortly after he was diagnosed, he began his treatment journey. He was treated with surgery, chemotherapy, autologous stem cell transplant, as well as radiation therapy. And then in April of last year, he enrolled on the Children's Oncology Group trial with Unituxin, the chimeric antibody. Next slide, please. And he received this therapy for 6 months, and it was a very difficult 6 months. And we're all very excited about the evolution of immunotherapy, but it comes with a lot of its own unique side effects and toxicities that as providers we have to overcome and help him overcome. So he spent a lot of time in the intensive care unit, and all the medical providers, the nurses, the pharmacists in our organization really, I think, stepped up to give him that intensive support that he needed to get through this. He has now completed his therapy, and we're about to approach our 1 year off therapy anniversary, and he is thriving. Again, he's playing soccer. So this is very exciting for everybody. Next slide, please. So this is Rex and his family, and he's an example of what support for collaborative research through Children's Oncology Group, pharmaceuticals, teaming together, what we can accomplish. This drug may reach hundreds of children each year, but there are so many more that we need to help. We have miles to go before childhood cancer is no longer the deadly illness that it is now. So we need to do more. Thank you.
I was given the task of trying to put this into perspective for pediatric cancer, maybe give you some more ammunition as you harass your congressman, and also to talk about the 21st Century Cures Act and how that impacts our patients and us. And so if you go on the next slide, what I've learned is don't be late in the program because everybody's already stolen your thunder, and then you come to Congress, you find out that they give your message in 2 minutes and they do it better. But you're going to have to see. Hopefully, I'll give you some of the background for what they talked about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about cancer in children, some of which you've heard already, a progress report, which you already heard, some of which you've heard from Lee, and then the challenges and particularly the role of this very important act for ourselves and for pediatricians, pediatric oncologists, all of the caretakers, and specifically for our patients. So next. So this is what you've heard. Cancer is the leading cause of death in children, or leading medical cause of death. Next. And it's not that rare. So 1 in 300 children are diagnosed with cancer. So we think of it as a rare disease. It's not so rare. There's 12,500 new cases in the United States each year, depending on what you call a child. Now, those of you who are parents know that this can vary a lot, but certainly up to age 20, we would consider children, and regrettably, more than 2,000 children died as recently as 2004 from cancer. Next. So this is an important thing. Childhood cancer is not that rare. In aggregate, it is actually the 5th most common cancer in the United States, after the big breast, lung, prostate, colon, the ones you hear a lot about. But in aggregate, childhood cancers fit right in there with top occurring cancers. Next. And we have made a lot of progress. I'm not going to belabor this except to know that we have had success, but the success is not, we haven't finished the job. So we're now curing close to 80% of children with cancer, but that of course means that 20% are not cured. And the next slide shows that we've made progress in virtually every single cancer, but there are a couple that lag behind. You can see certain leukemias, brain tumors, we're not doing nearly as well as we are in some of the more, the ones that we are more popularized that we have been so successful in. Next. And here's a very important point that was made by our congressman here, that children that are cured of cancer live a long time, and this is why they should be invested in. So when you look at a child cured of cancer, they have an average life expectancy of 69 more years. This is not retiree years. This is years of paying taxes, being productive, and so this is why the emphasis on childhood cancer should be very important. Next, though, shows the unfortunate side effect, which you also heard, of survivorship, which is that there are the treatments that we have, which are very successful, regrettably are associated with a number of side effects, and nearly 2/3 of long-term survivors of childhood cancer have at least one chronic condition and an effect on their longevity related to their treatment. So not only do we need better treatments to cure the patients that we're not curing, but we need better treatments because the ones that we have are associated with horrible side effects. Next. So why have we been successful? Mostly because we're just lucky. The agents that we have worked. We also are treating healthy people, not elderly adults with other comorbidities, so they tolerate the things that we do to them very well. And you've heard about the importance of collaboration among institutions, among investigators, and most important, collaboration with laboratory investigations, which has really revealed the biology of cancer and led to many of the new advances. Next. So here's what we know. It takes a lot of people to take care of children with cancer, but what we learned from tumor tissue has been that cancers are heterogeneous collections of diseases. They're what we call neuroblastoma, what we call acute lymphoblastic leukemia, are no longer considered single diseases, but in fact are very heterogeneous collections. And these are orphan diseases. They're not that common, and each of the individual ones are thus in small numbers in the United States each year, and I've already talked about the survivors of our current therapies. So next. And you saw this from Lee, that we've made a lot of progress, which we're very proud of, but that progress tends to be leveling off, and so we need new paradigms for the future. And you heard some of those from Lee on the next slide to show you that cancers are now driven by specific non-random mutations, and that inhibitions of these driver mutations can produce remarkable responses and remissions, in addition to the immunotherapies that you heard about. Pathways are promiscuous. What I mean by that is that a pathway that may be relevant in neuroblastoma is also relevant in lung cancer and in lymphoma, and therefore an agent that would target a pathway may be useful in very many cancers, and we have specific examples of this. And people have been talking about this in this meeting today, about how important these things are and how they really can revolutionize care, and I wanted to give you an example. The next slide just shows you, this is leukemia. Leukemia is not one disease anymore. It's 27 or whatever it is, different diseases driven by different mutations. And the next slide shows that these mutations are, well, first, that we've made progress just with empiricism, just using therapies that are best guess, building on our past knowledge. We've actually improved the outcome. But if you look at the, one more, next slide. Actually, what we've done is we have different results in the different subtypes of leukemia, and this just shows that some kinds of leukemia in that pie chart of all the different types have great outcomes with more than 90% survival, but some of them are still associated with not such a good outcome. And in particular, you can see the orange line is the survival of patients with Philadelphia chromosome-positive leukemia with a specific mutation, a specific driver, and these patients, up until recently, were only curable with bone marrow transplantation. But from the laboratory, it was understood what the mutation, what the driver was, and a molecule that was developed that could inhibit this, imatinib, was found to be successful in other diseases, but also in this disease, where if you see the next slide, you can see the progress that has been made. That's the historical curve, the lower line of what the survival was for patients. And just adding this drug to the standard or the aggressive therapy that we used for this leukemia, just adding imatinib, really revolutionized the care of these patients. So what we see is understanding things in the laboratory, and this is, of course, 30 years of research, sort of summarized on one slide, can be translated into the clinic to improve the outcome of children with cancer. So next. And as you can see, we're continuing to make progress between 1990, the lower curve, and the more recently diagnosed patients. We continue to make progress because we're not satisfied with 90%. We really want to cure all children with leukemia. Next. So now let me go through what is the impact of this very important legislation on us and on our patients and on all of us here. First, you've heard about the funding, increased funding for the National Institute of Health, which has been proposed as part of this. This, of course, is extraordinarily timely. You should have heard from all the enthusiasm, and from Lee, from me, that what we're learning now is opening a door of tremendous opportunities for us, and we can't, or as Lee said, we can't take our foot off the accelerator now. Now's the time actually to push harder on that accelerator. Not only that, but part of this also will encourage physicians and scientists to plan careers as biomedical investigators. We need new blood in this field, and we need, therefore, funding to encourage them to join us in our field. And additional incentives for young investigators written into this will also be an important improvement in getting people into the field. Funding for the Food and Drug Administration. They're an important collaborator. You heard even from industry that without them, we can't get these agents translated into the clinic. And many of the initiatives in the bill require FDA effort, and therefore it's going to require increased funding to make it happen, to allow the FDA to do its part. And then you heard from Lee, the National Precision Medicine Initiative. You've heard what precision medicine is all about. This is obviously a very important first step toward the future of cancer care, particularly in children. Next. So, what are other things that are patient-focused drug development, a very key part of this bill? It's an as part of this bill, we have reauthorization of the Creating Hope Act, which you've heard about. And this, as you heard, an important and provocative initiative with a number of early successes, but this expires in, what was it somebody said, St. Patrick's Day in 2016. It needs to be reauthorized, and there is a worry that the timeline for the 21st Century Cure Act may not be in time to reauthorize this. We know it won't be the entire answer. It's certainly a provocative and wonderful initiative, but we need more, and it's going to be reviewed as a planned assessment of its impact to see if we can build on this to have other incentives to develop drugs for children with cancer. We have the inclusion of patient perspectives in drug evaluation. This is important to assess what is the value of a drug to patients and their families, not just that it improves outcome, but it also reduces symptoms. And this should be a component of the risk-benefit assessment for new drugs, an assessment that's a little bit complicated because many times we don't hear from the children directly, but we hear it filtered through the parents' assessment of how their children have reacted to it. But in any case, this should not be the primary outcome. We shouldn't be approving drugs just because it seems to be useful for families. It has to have some hard outcomes measures as well, improving the cure rate, symptom control, progression-free survival, and survival. These are the kinds of things that we can measure directly that should always be primary endpoints. Next. Again, part of this patient-focused drug development as part of the 21st Century Cures is a focus on novel clinical trial designs. What we have been using in the past are probably not suitable for the future where we have small numbers of patients. But in these novel designs, we have to be careful to maintain a rigorous assessment of safety and efficacy. That's what we really need, and we can't just sort of throw drugs at people. We have to make sure that they're really doing what they're supposed to do. And part of this act will also require the use of the central IRB, which should accelerate the pace of getting trials opened at institutions. Other things that are written into this initiative are promoting pediatric research. This is a sense of Congress that we need a national pediatric research network, a national consortium of research institutions. Of course, in cancer, we're blessed with the fact that we already have the Children's Oncology Group, which is part of this, but obviously this will, as a sense of Congress, this is important. And actually, Congress is understanding that just having the North American institutions is insufficient. We need actually a global pediatric clinical study network, which is what we are already doing. Many of our studies involve cancer patients from around the world. Hopefully, as part of this network, though, we could have harmonization among the NIH, the FDA, the European Union, and industry, so that we're all on the same page. And this could be a huge initiative to help us because, again, congressmen are listening to us and understanding what we've already learned, that we need every patient in the world for some of these diseases to continue to make progress. But of course, we shouldn't just have the incentives. We need also to have the regulatory requirements of PREA that to encourage study of drugs in children where they're applicable for childhood diseases, particularly childhood cancer. Next. We talked about access to novel agents, another very important part of this 20th Century Cures Act, which would expedite patient access to new agents, expediting approval to breakthrough therapies, and provisions in this to help patients navigate the FDA expanded access and compassionate use processes to make sure that it's less burdensome, more accessible to patients, and allowing patients to better assess whether a novel agent will be useful for them. We have to assure, though, that the clinical trial process is not subverted. We still need rigorous clinical trials as the best way of assessing the safety and efficacy of a drug to make sure that we really develop new, more effective therapies. And of course, use of investigational agents in the context of a clinical trial, which is monitoring in real time, is certainly the safest option for patients. And what we really need is earlier access to agents under development so that we can study them in children and develop novel agents more rapidly, especially for children with cancer. Next. How about us? How about the clinicians, not just our patients? Of course, this are all in the right direction for us. We can capitalize on our new understanding of cancer with increased investment in research, and this is, of course, the investment in the NIH and the FDA. Encourage young scientists for careers in biomedical research, particularly in cancer research. You heard about the investment in precision medicine, and of course, cancers, especially pediatric cancers, are the prototype diseases for this kind of approach and should lead to a more rational and streamlined drug development. Hopefully, harmonization of efforts at the NIH and FDA would encourage even further broader collaborations and hopefully ultimately leading to more rapid access to promising agents for our children, both under study and through other methods as well. Next. So, what does this act, the 21st Century Cures Act, represent? It's an important first step towards improving research and drug development for children with cancer. We need it. There are several new incentives for drug developments, but there are already incentives in place, but these should help further. We need new therapeutic strategies, as you heard from Lee. There's new opportunities here, and some of this is not entirely addressed in the 21st Century Cures Act, but it certainly is a first step. We have to be careful not to lose the incentives and regulatory mandates that are already in place. This is not a replacement. This is building on what we already have, although these are going to have to be retooled in the light of our improved understanding of the biology of cancer. So next, obviously, a big thank you is well earned by our representatives and the Congressional Childhood Cancer Caucus, as well as all the members of Congress who work tirelessly to advance the health of children, particularly children with cancer, and to all the advocates that work so hard with us to help improve the cure rate. Thanks.
We are in the home stretch, I swear. Next slide. Webster's Dictionary defines advocacy as the act or process of supporting a cause or proposal. Something brought you here today. By definition, that makes you an advocate for childhood cancer. You care about this cause or want to learn more about what is happening to the kids in this country. I became an advocate for childhood cancer when I was 9 years old, when my sister was diagnosed with rhabdomyosarcoma at the age of 13. She survived. Childhood cancer impacted my family again in 2006 when my son Mason was diagnosed with a brain tumor at the age of 3. Unfortunately, he did not survive and died at age 5. He would have been 13 this week. For all of us supporting children with cancer and their families, advocacy is personal. Perhaps you became a champion for childhood cancer because it impacted your child or someone in your family. Or maybe you became involved because your friend convinced you to support a cause, or you heard a story about a child that changed you and made you want to jump in and create change. Or maybe you're the staffer here today, which we hope there are, and your boss sent you here to listen and learn more. Today, we are all advocates for cancer, kids with cancer and their families. Next slide. The childhood cancer community has 3 large goals. We want to increase pediatric cancer research, we want to increase pediatric cancer drug development, and we want to provide the necessary support for childhood cancer survivors. And when I talk about survivors, I'm talking about from the point of diagnosis through their continuum of care. Last year, the childhood cancer community came together to discuss the top priorities of groups as they related to all 3 of these goals. You can go to the next slide. We looked at the great ideas that had already been developed and worked on, and to find out how they fit together and where there was broad consensus. And some of us, that was one of many meetings that happened over a 9-month period. A broad agreement was developed around a new legislative goal. We took our consensus ideas and drafts to our champions on the Hill, and the Childhood Cancer STAR Act was born. This bill represents the heart, soul, and hard work of many organizations and individuals in this community. This legislation brings together some of the best and brightest of all the ideas. You might even call them the STAR ideas: survivorship, treatment, access, and research. You can go to the next slide. The Childhood Cancer STAR Act was introduced in the House and the Senate just before the August recess. In the House, it is H.R. 3381. It was introduced by Congressman McCaul, Congressman Van Hollen, and Congresswoman Jackie Spear, and currently it has over 35 bipartisan co-sponsors. I believe we're almost up to 38 as of this morning. One more today. Whew. In the Senate, it is S1883. Next slide. And it was introduced by Senator Jack Reed and Senator Shelley Moore Capito, and currently has 8 bipartisan co-sponsors. None of this, you can go to the next slide, none of this would be possible without the incredible work of some really smart folks on Capitol Hill, our champions, as well as their staff. These folks are the people who took our ideas and drafts and turned them into the STAR Act. Andy Taylor with Congressman McCaul, Jill Brimmer with Senator Reed, Zeke, I'm going to screw up your last name, with Congressman Van Hollen, Molly Fishman with Congresswoman Spear, and Dana Richter with Senator Capito. The STAR Act takes what our community is advocating for and brings it together in one piece of legislation that we can rally around together. And happily, it contains several pieces of legislation that have been worked on before that have had broad bipartisan support in the past, including the Carolyn Price Walker Concord Childhood Cancer Act and the Childhood Cancer Survivors Quality of Life Act. Next slide. So here are the key components of the STAR Act. You can go to the next one. Here, the first one is expanding opportunities for childhood cancer research. This bill would authorize the National Cancer Institute to expand existing efforts to collect biospecimens for childhood cancer patients enrolled in NCI-sponsored clinical trials and to collect and maintain relevant clinical, biological, and demographic information on all children, adolescents, and young adults with cancer. Next. It would also improve childhood cancer surveillance. It would authorize grants to state cancer registries and to track incidences of child, adolescents, and young adult cancer. And this funding would be used to identify and train reporters of childhood cancer cases, secure infrastructure to ensure early reporting and capture of childhood cancer incidences, and support the collection of cases into a childhood cancer national registry. Next. One that is very near and dear to many people around the round table's heart. It was improving the quality of life for childhood cancer survivors. It would enhance the research of late effects of childhood cancers, including the study on insurance coverage and payment of the care for childhood cancer survivors. It would improve collaboration among providers so that doctors are better able to care for this population, and would establish a pilot program to begin explore innovative models of care for childhood cancer survivors. Next. And ensuring patient access to publicly available compassionate use policies. This also is part and parcel of what's happening in 21st Century Cures too. It ensures that pharmaceutical companies have publicly accessible compassionate use policies for drugs treating serious or life-threatening illnesses, and it would require the FDA to finalize its guidance for the industry on this issue. Next. And ensuring pediatric expertise on the National Institutes of Health. It would require the inclusion of at least one pediatric oncologist on the National Cancer Advisory Board, which I'm happy to report has already happened, but we want to get it as part of the STAR Act as well, and to improve pediatric research reporting requirements to include childhood cancer. Next. We urge you to learn more about the Childhood Cancer Survivorship Treatment Access Research STAR Act. What is your job today as an advocate for childhood cancer? If you're a staffer, add your boss as a co-sponsor. And if you're an advocate, encourage your member of Congress to co-sponsor. Our champions have brought the STAR Act to the start line, and it's our time to show up and help them carry it over the finish line. Let's continue to work together in honor, in memory, and in defense of all kids with cancer. Our nation's children deserve nothing less. Thank you.
Great. A big round of applause again, please, for our panelists. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to open it up to just a few questions. I know we're running late on time, but if you have a question, please raise your hand, state your name, and keep your question short if you can.
Richard Plotkin, Max Cure Foundation. If anybody took a photo of Congressman McCaul and Congressman Van Hollen hugging each other before, I would like a copy of that. And if they didn't take a photo of that, I would like Andy to take such a photo, because in the advocacy, that's how I'm going to start my contacts with my senators, to demonstrate, put aside all this crap. This is nonpartisan. This is for children with cancer. So join the team. Thank you.
We have any other questions?
Hi, Ruth Hoffman. I'm with the American Childhood Cancer Organization, which is actually in the 8th District in Maryland as well. So my question actually is for you, Roger. I guess one of the issues when a drug is developed and then the company decides to sell it, how do we control, I guess, that drug then becoming priced out of range? So example, asparaginase was recently sold. The price of a vial went from $5,000 a vial to $17,600 a vial. And that's, a backbone drug to treat acute lymphocytic leukemia. The same thing happened with clofarabine. The drug was sold and it became astronomical in price. So how does industry help protect that aspect of making access to drugs, available for kids?
Yeah, and it's clearly a seminal question when you develop and market a drug. How are you going to price it, and what the reimbursement tolerance is to a certain price? So, these are high-brow, high-touch, intensive therapies, difficult to manufacture. So they're going to come with a certain high cost. I think that's a known reality. The question is what's tolerable for everybody, and what's the ethical right price to do. I know with Unituxin, we've been very favorably received in terms of our pricing structure, but we were sensitive to the fact that the NCI and the Children's Oncology Group invested in the research. So we didn't have the earlier research spend and require the capitalization of that spend at the back end. So it's hard, though, because if you're going to take, these actually become ultra-orphan indications. And the smarter we get with the science, actually the more targeted the indicated population is. That's a good thing, right? We're going to give a therapy to a child with the best chance of working because the science supports that this child has these certain characteristics that they will respond favorably to the therapy. But then you've diminished your market size. So this is where it is a bit of a conundrum, actually, how to price a therapy. And we've taken Unituxin almost as a break-even or a loss leader, because we want to get into more therapeutic opportunities in pediatric cancer. This isn't a moneymaker for us, but that's our view. Others may not share a similar view, but I think the reality is as we parse these indications and the usages of therapies into smaller and smaller populations of patients, the things become pricier. It would be like if you sell an ultra exotic luxury car, it's going to cost more. And that's kind of what's going to happen with these very exotic therapies in some respects. But it's a great question, and certainly there's a lot of debate around that we're sensitive to.
Do we have any other questions? We have time for one or two more, if anyone has anything. Going once, going twice. Well, I want to just introduce my boss for some closing remarks, Congressman McCaul. It's unexpected, but I'll turn it over to the Congressman.
Well, let me just say thanks to the panelists, thanks to Andy and all the staff who worked so hard on this, and Vicki. I get to stand up and talk about this great stuff, but they made it happen. And I think Unituxin, the story of Rex Ryan, is demonstrating that we can make a difference in this cause. I want to thank all of you for being a part of the cause. And I think the great challenge in front of us, again, is the 21st Cures Act, how important this legislation is, and the reauthorization of the Creating Hope Act, and of course the STAR Act, getting that passed into law. And so I look forward to working with all of you in making that happen. And Leslie, thank you so much for being here today. Seeing that, the best picture, I don't think it was on the screen, with all of his hair growing back and little Rex, to to see someone whose life was saved because of what we're trying to do here today really makes it all worthwhile. So thank you again for being here. Appreciate it.
All right, well, thank you all again, and thank you so much to our panelists. We look forward to another summit next year.